Picture stumbling upon hidden cinematic gems, long overshadowed by mainstream blockbusters and award favorites. Overlooked and underappreciated, these masterpieces are waiting for their moment to shine. When medicine turns murderous, scalpels gleam under fluorescent lights as Michael Crichton dissects modern medicine's darker impulses. Trust with each beep of the hospital monitor. As Doctor notices a pattern, unsettling patients slipping into comas during routine surgeries. Her search for truth spirals into nightmare territory. She infiltrates the Jefferson Institute and finds something unthinkable. Comatose patients, hanging suspended human fruit, ripe for harvesting. This film doesn't rely on jump scares, it thrives in sterilized horror. Antiseptic corridors, footsteps echo like heartbeats. Crichton turns the familiar, white coats, surgical masks, consent forms, into instruments of dread. Michael Douglas supports as the skeptic, boyfriend, colleague. But their romance sometimes feels grafted on, like a transplant that doesn't take. The real romance between capitalism and medicine's unholy alliance. Critics called it far-fetched in '78, but now we see its prescience. Medical ethics, body autonomy, healthcare as commodity. Crichton walks a tightrope, exploitation versus exposé, and never topples, even with its B-movie DNA. 4 decades later, still jolts, not because it redefined the genre, but because of the question it asks. In a profit-driven system, is your body truly your own? Bad Timing 1980, Love's Autopsy. A woman lies comatose, possibly dying, while her lover coolly answers police questions. Time splinters like broken glass. Nicholas Roeg's Bad Timing dissects obsession with clinical precision, so disturbing its own distributor called it repulsive. Art Garfunkel is Alex, a psychoanalyst. Theresa Russell is Melina, erratic, magnetic. Their relationship? Not romance. Mutual consumption, each feeding on the other's pain until nothing remains but hollow shells. Vienna's elegance masks psychological warfare. Alex doesn't love Melina, he stalks her, possesses her, then destroys her. The film unfolds in disorienting fragments. Sex scenes blur into hospital procedures, disturbing parallels between pleasure and violation. Harvey Keitel plays the detective. He reconstructs the relationship like a crime scene. And then, the devastating truth, Alex didn't just find Melina overdosed. He watched her die before calling for help. Roeg's genius lies in making the viewer complicit. The camera lingers. The edits collide. Past ecstasy with present devastation. Critics called it exploitation in 1980. Now we see it for what it is. An unflinching portrait of toxic masculinity, of control, masquerading as desire. Russell bleeds on screen. Garfunkel chills in silence. Bad Timing is criminally underrated because it offers no redemption, no moral handrails, no escape. It refuses to turn obsession into romance, control into passion, violation into misunderstanding. It does not blink. It does not forgive, and it does not lie. The Silent Partner, banking on brilliance. Money changes hands, then changes everything. In a crowded Toronto shopping mall, a Santa-suited robber slides a note across the counter. The teller reads it and keeps most of the cash for himself. That moment, it launches one of the most underrated thrillers of the '70s. Daryl Duke's The Silent Partner unfolds like a quiet scream. Elliot Gould plays Miles Cullen, mild-mannered, meticulous, and smarter than anyone expects. Christopher Plummer is Harry Rakel, a sadistic thief pushed past the edge by the one thing he didn't anticipate, a clever bank clerk who fights back. What follows is psychological warfare, not guns blazing, but mind scheming. Traps baited, lines crossed. Curtis Hanson's script doesn't follow the rules. Cullen doesn't survive the danger, he thrives in it. Every character hides behind a mask. Oscar Peterson's jazz score dances with tension, with threat, with snowflakes falling on buried intentions. Nobody saw this coming, not the cops, Not the audience, not even the critics who wrote it off in 1978. But time knows better. The Silent Partner is a masterclass in restraint, in slow-burning tension, in moral ambiguity where everyone's hands get dirty counting blood money. It laid the blueprint: ordinary man versus psychopath. The formula so many thrillers would follow, but few would execute with such chilling precision. Let me know if you'd like this styled for voiceover, captioned for social, or converted into a trailer script. This one's a hidden gem that deserves the spotlight. Blood soaks through linen. Two men breathe heavy, neither fully sure why. They must keep fighting. But they do. Ridley Scott's debut does not just tell a story, it etches it in bronze. Keith Carradine's reluctant Lieutenant Farraud, Harvey Keitel are locked in a decades-long duel that begins with a single insult and never ends. Napoleonic wars rage around them. Empires rise and collapse. Generations pass, but their war never changes. Blades flash in snowy forests, pistols crack through ruined villas, sabers slice through mist-drenched fields. Time moves forward, but honor holds them still. What starts as a formal duty becomes a lifelong obsession. Farraud becomes a prisoner in a cage with no bars, built from pride, protocol, and something far darker. Even after Napoleon's defeat, after peace, the duels continue, because Farraud must fight, because Joubert cannot refuse, because neither man knows how to stop. Scott doesn't glamorize, he hypnotizes. His camera glides through candlelit salons and battlefield fog, like a ghost bearing witness to the beautiful insanity of masculine pride. Critics once called it just pretty. They didn't see the poison beneath the polish. It is not a revenge film, not a war film, not a costume drama. It's a psychological opera drenched in blood and velvet, where each frame is a painting and each duel a question with no answer. Why do they fight? By the end, you might not know, but you'll understand. The Long Riders, 1980. Blood runs thicker than legend. Bullets rip through the streets of Northfield, Minnesota. Townsfolk don't scatter, they shoot back. Bodies fall, horses scream, and the James Younger legend shatters like storefront glass. Walter Hill's revisionist Western doesn't mythologize, it demythologizes, and in doing so becomes something more powerful. His masterstroke, casting real brothers as outlaw brothers, the Keaches, the Carradines, the Quaids, the Guests, that unspoken rhythm between siblings, it's on screen, and it's palpable. This isn't about revenge or glory, it's about blood ties so deep they turn tragic. Greek tragic. David Carradine's Cole Younger? He cauterizes his own wound with a red-hot blade and never makes a sound. That's the code, that's the pain Hill explores. Not six-shooter swagger, but the cost of being a man in the dying West. Ry Cooder's score drifts through it all, folk ghosts humming lullabies over slow-motion massacres. And when the Northfield raid hits, it hits hard. Bodies spin, blood sprays. It's less a shootout than a symphony of death. It came between the excess of Heaven's Gate and the spectacle of raiders. Too grounded for the blockbuster crowd, too poetic for the traditionalists. But here's the truth. The Long Riders bleeds authenticity. It strips the Western of its shine, but never its soul. It shows how brotherhood saves you and damns you, because when the ride begins, you don't get to stop, even if the road ends in blood and ruin. A shrewd oil executive flies from the heat of Houston to a fog-draped village on Scotland's northern coast. His goal? Buy the entire town. Bill Forsyth's quiet masterpiece flips the usual formula. This isn't a brash outsider fixing the locals. It's the village that undoes the visitor, softly, slowly, completely. Peter Riegert's McIntyre arrives with a briefcase and a plan, but the villagers, they're already ready to sell. They dream of jacuzzis and Italian shoes. No resistance, no protest. So why then does Mac find himself stalling? Maybe it's the sky. Maybe it's the sea. Maybe it's the way every phone call is answered like a passing breeze. Furness isn't quirky, it's spellbound. Burt Lancaster plays an oil tycoon who cares more about comets than contracts. Dennis Lawson's Gordon is a pub owner, accountant, negotiator who lives with a wife he adores so openly it confuses Mac. And in that gentle pull, McIntyre's corporate armor starts to crack. He gathers seashells, watches the northern lights, smiles at seals, and realizes, you can't take this place with you. Not in a suitcase, not in a contract, not in a deal. Mark Knopfler's score follows that transformation, from boardroom crispness to Celtic longing. It dares to be still. It resists drama, rejects confrontation, and in the end, one phone booth ringing in the distance. A question unanswered, a feel unresolved, a hero lost and found. Time after time, 1979. Tomorrow's nightmare, yesterday's hero. A Victorian scholar steps out of a time machine, right into late 70s San Francisco. His eyes widen at neon lights, fast food, and murder. His invention has been hijacked. His friend, Jack the Ripper. Nicholas Meyer's audacious debut takes a bonkers premise, H.G. Wells chasing a serial killer through time, and spins it into something shockingly elegant. Malcolm McDowell plays Wells with disarming warmth, a man who wrote of utopias, now face to face with a future that feels like a nightmare. David Warner's Ripper? Chilling, controlled, and disturbingly at home in the chaos of the 20th century. I belong here, old man. You don't. He's not hiding. He's thriving. Because in a world of television violence, war reports, and casual brutality, Jack the Ripper looks around and says, I'm an amateur. Mary Steenburgen's Amy is the bridge, an independent woman who guides Wells through this dizzying future while falling for the only man in town who still opens doors and quotes humanism. The result? A blend of suspense, romance, time travel, and critique, with Wells navigating revolving doors and existential dread in equal measure. It dares to ask, what if the future isn't progress, but camouflage for savagery? Wells may catch his monster, but what he can't fix is us. A young veteran returns to the South, his grandfather's fire and brimstone sermons still burning in his head. Hazel Motes comes to town, declaring the Church of Truth without Christ, but his soul, fractured beneath that wide-brimmed hat, is a far cry from clarity. John Huston's fearless adaptation of Flannery O'Connor's Southern Gothic masterpiece presents Hazel as a man on the run from God. But the harder he runs, the more his life spirals into a grotesque loop. Brad Dourif's Hazel trembles with manic intensity, an atheist who can't escape the perverse rituals of the faith he rejects. Each attempt to sever ties with Christ only twists him closer to madness. Harry Dean Stanton's blind preacher hawks salvation with eerie calm. His daughter, Amy Wright, weaves innocence into manipulation. Ned Beatty's traveling evangelist peddles a shriveled relic, and Hazel, blind to it all, ends up blinding himself in search of truth. Physical darkness becomes his spiritual illumination. The film's vision of the American South is pure carnival. Rain-slick streets, garish boarding houses where preachers, hucksters, and prophets blur into one. Huston never winks at O'Connor's religious vision. He lets it simmer in all its grotesque brilliance. Viewers often mistake its savage humor for mockery, missing that Hazel's final act of self-destruction is not tragedy, but triumph. In his blood-soaked path to redemption, salvation isn't escape, it's suffering transformed. A woman convulses on the subway floor, her body writhing in a grotesque dance, grocery bags smashed, fluids leaking from every orifice. Commuters step carefully around her, witnessing not a breakdown, but something far more otherworldly. Andrzej Żuławski's nightmarish portrayal of divorce transforms and disforms into something far worse than horror. It's the complete, violent, psychological disintegration of two souls who once loved each other. Sam Neill's spy Mark returns home to discover his wife, Anna, Isabella Johnny, has abandoned their family. Her confession of infidelity sets them both on parallel descents, their once innocent lives now blurred with hallucinatory madness. Cold War Berlin, a city divided, becomes the perfect backdrop for a marriage equally torn in two. Concrete walls separate neighbors, while tentacled creatures crawl from bathroom tiles. Żuławski's brilliance lies in turning marital collapse into something as visceral, as violent, as demonic possession. Anna's lover is revealed as a grotesque, unfinished creature that she serves with ever-deepening devotion. Ajani's performance is an assault on the senses. Her body is both battleground and victim, contorting under the weight of repressed desires and emotional devastation. Her subway breakdown, a continuous, unbroken 4-minute scene of sexual and demonic convulsion, remains one of cinema's most raw and unrelenting moments. It refuses to separate the psychological from the body horror. American audiences saw a butchered version, missing 40 minutes, sequences deemed too extreme for horror fans, too bizarre for the arthouse crowd. Perhaps that's why it remains underground. Possession reveals the brutal, unsettling truths about human relationships that most films are too terrified to even whisper. Welcome to House, where nothing makes sense, and yet in some wild way, everything makes perfect sense. Nobuhiko Obayashi's masterpiece follows schoolgirl Gorgeous and her 6 friends, each named for their defining trait: fantasy, prof, melody, kung fu, Mac, sweet, as they travel to an aunt's countryside mansion. The house, hungry and patient, begins consuming them one by one, through increasingly deranged set pieces that shatter logic, physics, and sanity itself. A clock face becomes a swimming pool. Blood transforms into cascading flower petals. Furniture attacks. Mattresses swallow victims whole. Every death scene merges slapstick comedy, surreal horror, and pop art aesthetics, often within the same frame. Deliberately artificial backdrops, cartoonish sound effects, and jarring edits create a disorientation that feels less like a filmmaking error and more like calculated madness. The aunt floats suspiciously. Her white cat teleports between scenes. A watermelon becomes demonic. Its refusal to choose between horror and comedy, between childhood innocence and adult terror. Obayashi, originally hired to make a Japanese answer to Jaws, instead channeled his 11-year-old daughter's deepest fears into cinematic form, creating something no focus group would ever approve, but something no viewer could ever forget. Western audiences dismissed it as exploitation trash, until decades later, when critics recognized its subversive brilliance. How beneath the kaleidoscopic chaos lies a meditation on atomic trauma, lost innocence, and generational wounds. Japan's wartime ghosts haunt every frame, transforming the seemingly random madness into something unexpectedly profound. House remains the only film where dancing skeletons, carnivorous pianos, and sentient light fixtures make perfect emotional, if not logical, sense. These films aren't just hidden gems, they're cinematic experiences that demand to be rediscovered. If you're ready to explore the films that time forgot, but genius crafted, dive into these masterpieces. Don't let them fade into the shadows. Watch them now, and let your perspective be forever changed. Want more underrated films? Subscribe and join the conversation.